Welcome back to the Dirt Shows. Sorry, I'm late. My plane was supposed to come in at about 3 o'clock, I think 2:30, and the captain was there, and the plane was there, and one of the flight attendants was there, but the other flight attendant didn't show up, and they couldn't reach her, and nobody knew where she was, and finally, 3 hours later, she appears, and so the plane took off. But by that time, I missed my 5:30 time for the live podcast. But hey, better late than never. So I'm back. Let's get right to the issue at hand. You know, I have never seen a nothing burger story covered so extensively by the media, particularly by the left wing media, as the Epstein story. Let's be clear: there's really nothing to the Epstein story. Epstein was a guy who cultivated lots of wealthy people. They didn't know anything about what he was doing on the side. He kept his private life very, very much apart from his public life. And I have seen no evidence that he ever trafficked anybody. What he was convicted of was what he pleaded guilty to was having sex with two women, one above age, one below age. The one that was below age was, I think, months before her 18th birthday. That's all he's ever been convicted of in court. Of course, the Miami Herald put a very irresponsible journalist on the case, and she claims to have spoken to dozens and dozens of other women who accused him and then came forward and brought lawsuits and collected lots and lots and lots of money. The only person that has seriously been accused of being trafficked to, basically, is Prince Andrew, and he's denied his guilt, although he settled the case. But I think Epstein was too selfish. He wanted these young women to himself, and probably had some kind of improper sexual contact with dozens and dozens of women, many of whom were already working in the sex industry before he hired them away from their jobs in what were called whack shacks in West Palm Beach, and offered them more money to do what they were doing there to him in his house. I have never seen any evidence of any trafficking to prominent people. There were accusations, but they've been disputed and they've never been proved. And as I said the other day, I've seen the accusations, I've seen the redacted FBI files, and none of the people who are accused are currently office holders or in prominent positions of authority. Some are dead, some are long retired. Remember, this all allegedly happened 25 years ago, 26 years ago, 27 years ago. So it's old news. But the Democrats, particularly the Democratic media, CNN, MSNBC, sees this as the biggest story of the century, and it just won't go away. And Donald Trump is absolutely correct when he says, "Why are people so focused on this guy, this creep, who's long been dead?" It's hard to understand. I wrote an op-ed in today's Wall Street Journal. It'll appear tomorrow. It's online now, in which I go through all of the allegations and disprove them. There was no client list. There were no sex videos. He wasn't a member of the Mossad. He wasn't murdered. But conspiracy theorists won't go away. The one thing conspiracy theorists hate are irrefutable facts, and the irrefutable facts show that the conspiracy theories are just not valid, just not there. But there's a certain fascination with Jeffrey Epstein. Don't know why. I mean, he actually was a fascinating character, and things were written about him as a fascinating character even before he was accused. Where did he get all of his money? Well, he was dealing with very wealthy people, and they paid him, I think, 1% of what he invested, and he, invested it at 7 or 8%. So not a bad deal, and made him a very wealthy man. He was never a billionaire. but he was certainly worth several $100 million. And then he bought all these incredible real estates, the island, which he bought for a song, the house in New York, which apparently was given to him by Leslie Wexner. And that's a relationship that maybe ought to be explored. But Leslie Wexner is very old now and seemed senile when he was deposed. And then he had an apartment in Paris. I was never in the apartment in Paris. I was at his home in New York and at his home in Palm Beach. And my wife and daughter and I visited his island like months after he bought it. And it was totally desolate. Nobody was there, just us and another professor from Harvard, Michael Porter. We had dinner and we left. That was my sole contact with the island, but the island was worth a lot of money. He made very, very good investments. And he was probably worth several $100 million when he died. People want to look into that, that's fine. But this idea that there are prominent people out there, Bill Clinton and Bill Gates and other people who should be prosecuted on what? On the basis of allegations that were not proved? I'll give you an example. There's one woman, her name is Sarah Ransom, and she filed an affidavit in court, a sworn affidavit subject to perjury, in which she swore that she had evidence that both Bill and Hillary Clinton were pedophiles and had sex with young children, along with Richard Branson and some other people, prominent people. Big story, big story. This was in the run-up to the 2016 election. Hillary Clinton, pedophile. Then there was an investigation, and ultimately she had to admit, and she did, to the New Yorker magazine, you can check it out, that she made up the whole story out of whole cloth. She didn't ever have any evidence about any of these things. So, those are the kinds of things that appear in the case, these allegations. Some of the women were telling the truth, obviously, and they were paid off, but mostly what they were saying is they had improper sexual relationships with Jeffrey Epstein, not with other people. And so, as I said the other day, there is no client list. Jeffrey Epstein did not make a list. He didn't have a black book of people who he trafficked people to. No, of course he had an address book. I probably had 2 pages of he had every one of my addresses and phone numbers and contact information and cell phones. He had that with everybody. He had that with Bill Clinton. He had that with Donald Trump. The Donald Trump story is they were acquaintances, and Donald Trump did say that he was an interesting guy and he liked women on the young side, but there's no evidence that Donald Trump knew anything that untoward about Jeffrey Epstein. The young women were 24, 25, 26, 27. I don't know of anybody that I know of who ever saw Jeffrey Epstein with a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old. Obviously, I would have immediately reported it and would have never had any contact with him at all if I knew that that was the case. So none of us knew that. He kept his perverted private life completely separate from his very open public life. I was introduced to him by the lady, Lynn Rothschild, who told me he was this wonderful man and very charitable and he liked smart people and I should get to know him. And I agreed to meet with him for half an hour. And that was the beginning. But the story, there's no comparison, for example, between this and the Sean Combs case or some of the other cases. This has been blown so out of proportion and for political reasons. First the Republicans took advantage of it and were saying, oh my God, the Biden administration didn't investigate. It's terrible. They didn't investigate. There's all kinds of things that are being hidden. And then Republicans come to power. And now the Democrats are saying, oh my God, the Republicans are in power. And they've released this memorandum that says that there's no further investigation is warranted. Look, you know my position. I'm not going to emphasize it again. I want everything released. I said this from day one, from the day I was falsely accused by a woman who then acknowledged that she may have confused me with somebody else, misidentified me, and she withdrew her lawsuit. From day one, I said, I want everything revealed. I waive all my privacy, all of my rights, all of my privileges, whatever you have about me, put it out there. And they did. And yes, I was on Epstein's plane. Of course, he sent his plane for me when I was representing him as a lawyer and had to go down to Florida on numerous occasions to confer with the district attorney and then with the U.S. attorney. Sure, I was on his plane. So were all the other lawyers. We had a conference table. We sat around the conference table and we strategized the case. And Bill Clinton was on his plane. He flew to Asia with some prominent musicians and celebrities in the interest of promoting health. But there's no suggestion that any of these people did anything wrong or that Jeffrey Epstein trafficked anybody to them. So, the story is just not going to go away. Donald Trump is right when he says, "Why is this focus here?" I mean, there's fault, plenty of fault on the part of Democrats, plenty of fault on the part of the Republicans, most of the fault on the part of the media. CNN has been obsessed with this, just obsessed. Everybody, good people, decent journalists like Jake Tapper and Wolf Blitzer are talking about this all the time instead of talking about the Middle East and talking about Ukraine. Obviously, CNN has told them to do it. I know because I have a lawsuit against CNN that CNN tells its reporters and its commentators what to talk about. They send around memos every morning saying, what's the story that we're going to focus on? Obviously, they have sent around memos, whoever is in charge, saying, you got to talk about the Epstein thing. This is now is going to hurt Republicans. Now is going to hurt Republicans. It's going to backfire against Donald Trump. It's going to backfire against Pam Bundy. It's going to backfire against Patel. It's going to backfire against them all. So let's focus on it. Let's emphasize it. What's happened is the Democrats have decided to do what they have done before: weaponize the legal system, weaponize the justice system against Donald Trump and against the Democrats. There's no evidence that Donald Trump is in any way involved and did anything arguably wrong here. Nothing. And yet they're coming after him. They're coming after him, and they're saying that he's responsible. He's about as responsible as President Biden. Neither of them have control over this kind of thing. It's the media that has generated this story. I wrote a book some years ago called Guilt by Accusation, in which I argue that in today's world, if you're accused, you're guilty. You can't disprove it. I did disprove it. I had records, and I keep everything. I don't throw away anything. I still have some string from the time when I was like 11 years old. I wish I had kept my baseball cards and comic books. I have a shirt that says I used to be a millionaire. Then my mom threw out my comic books and baseball cards. But I've saved all my travel records and everything, so I was easily able to disprove. But it's very hard to prove a negative, that where you were, where you weren't. And so we have to be really careful about this. As I said yesterday, too, there's no client list, but there is an interview, probably several interviews, by the FBI, by alleged victims. And these victims, like Sarah Ransom, named people. And the courts have redacted the names for obvious reasons. They're not sure these accusations are credible. And if you're going to produce the names of those who are accused, you also have to produce the evidence that may show that the accusers are not credible. In the Sarah Ransom case, for example, if you're going to allege that Hillary Clinton had sex with underage boys or girls, I don't remember which sex it was, then you also have to release the fact that she admitted that she made up the story and that there's no truth to it. You can't just put out the accusations without the responses. You can't do that in a court of law, and you shouldn't do that in the court of public opinion. But CNN doesn't live by those rules. MSNBC doesn't live by those rules. They live by one rule: if it hurts Trump, go with it. If it helps Trump, suppress it. So, they're as guilty of suppression as they claim the administration is. Now, there's an answer. There's a solution to this. There are two judges in New York who have suppressed material, and the media has the right under the First Amendment to seek the unsealing of this material. I've said from day one, if any of the material involves me, I waive my rights. You can release anything you want about me, the accusations, the responses, whatever you want. And I think many people would take the same position. They want everything out there. I'm sure Bill Clinton would say that. I'm sure Donald Trump would say that. So I think it's important for the media to go in there, because they are the ones who have standing under the First Amendment to get this material unredacted and to have everything out there so there can be a fair trial in the court of public opinion. There's no presumption of innocence in the court of public opinion. That applies only in courts of law. But requirements of fairness obviously mandate that if information is released that is negative and withheld, that's exculpatory, that's not fair, and that's not what should be done. But we live in the age not only of biased media like CNN and MSNBC, but we also live in the internet age. So there's no such thing as a false story in the internet. Just today, I got on the internet, I got emails and other things saying kill all the Jews. Dershowitz is this, that. He's a Nazi. He's a pedophile. He's all of that. I get that. And people look at it, and some people believe it. Most people know it's not worth the paper that it isn't written on, because it's on the internet. But TikTok and all the other platforms, X, they can say almost anything. As you know, X, particularly Elon Musk, has tried to create a forum without undue censorship. Of course, that's impossible, because you can't just allow every conceivable accusation against innocent people to just go unanswered. So, we live in a cruel world, but we ought to err always on the side of revealing the information, not withholding it. When you withhold information, that's when conspiracy theories come about. If you disclose fully all the information right at the beginning, it's much harder to concoct a conspiracy theory. So I've always been an advocate of, when in doubt, let it out. There are obviously things that can't be revealed. The medical histories of people, lawyer-client privileges. I've waived all mine, even medical. I've waived everything. Whatever you want relating to Epstein, put it out there, because I know nothing would hurt me. Nothing would affect me in a negative way, because I know what the truth is. So I'm happy to have everything out there. There are certain people who don't. I mean, people settle cases not because they're guilty of the charge that they're accused of, but often they settle cases because, although they're innocent of the charge they're accused of, they have other things in their background. That may be true of Prince Andrew. We don't know. I mean, he was called, this is not my term, this is a media term, he was called Randy Andy. He had been separated from his wife and lived a life that he probably wouldn't want, his mother, who was then alive, wouldn't want to have disclosed. On the other hand, I had no problem with that. I welcomed a deposition, because I've never done anything in that area that I'm ashamed of. And so anybody want to discuss my romantic life, fine, go ahead, and then you'll be bored. But that's not true of everybody. And I always think what a weird thing it is that, I've been so faithful to my wife, and I don't flirt and I don't do anything like that. And yet I'm the one who's accused. And I know people who just have affairs on a weekly basis and have mistresses all over and everything. And, they never get accused. But people tell me all the time, you got to be so careful. No, yes, you do. But I was so careful, and yet I was accused. But fortunately, because I was so careful, I was able to disprove the allegations. And so I'm very happy with the state of the record now, and I really prefer not to talk about it anymore. And I wasn't planning to talk about it anymore, but then this story broke, and they came up with a videotape of me back in March, I think, on the Sean Spicer show. Nobody was talking about Epstein then, and in which I said there was no client list. Then they put that on, and it went viral, and everybody was saying, "Oh my God, oh my God." And so I today wrote an op-ed in the New York Times. I have a twofer today. I think it's the first time in my life I've had two op-eds in prominent newspapers on the same day. Today, tonight, and tomorrow's print newspapers. I have an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal about the Epstein case, and I have an op-ed in the New York Post about why Israel is not committing genocide. What happened is that there was an op-ed in the in the New York Times by a self-proclaimed genocide expert. He's not an expert in genocide at all. He's not an expert in law. He's not an expert, as far as I know, in anything. He's a very, very biased anti-Israel guy who has some connections in the past with Israel. And he said, "I know genocide when I see it. And Israel's committing genocide." He didn't say that I know genocide when I see it. And the Hamas is trying to commit genocide against Jewish civilians. He didn't say that, but he said, "I saw it in Israel." So I wrote a response to it, an op-ed, defining what genocide really means as a matter of law. And I've been teaching about this for many, many years. And so I've had two op-eds in one day about very, very different subjects. And, I'm an eclectic writer, and I write about what interests me. And so genocide and Jeffrey Epstein all in one day. And so I'm hoping that the issue subsides. One of my best friends, who I've known since I'm 5 years old, wrote to me and said, "Oh, you shouldn't have done the op-ed thing. It just raises the whole Epstein thing again." Well, I'm not unhappy about that. I'm not trying to duck any issues. Some of the people who are accused just remain silent. And it mostly went away. For example, George Mitchell, the former former secretary of everything, and former senator, he just never commented on it, and the newspapers just didn't pick it up. But that's not my style. My style is always to answer and respond. I don't want the story to go away. I want the truth to come out. And so to get the truth out, you have to be somewhat proactive. And so that's what I am. That's what I've done. I'm not going to say anything negative about anybody. I'm just trying to put the case in context and argue about what's fair to disclose, what's fair not to disclose, and what in fact has happened, so I can set the record straight, because I do have an insider perspective on the case. So read my op-ed in today's Wall Street Journal, tonight's Wall Street Journal, in the newspaper tomorrow, and read my op-ed tonight in the New York Post, and that will also be in the newspaper tomorrow. And while we're talking about reading my stuff, please, The Preventive State, you got to read that. You got to buy it. You got to get it on Amazon. And you got to really answer those people who are trying to cancel it and cancel me. So I appreciate that. All right, let's turn to some letters. I got a bunch of them today. The issue isn't the list or suicide. The issue is that 0 individuals have been charged, let alone revealed or convicted. Epstein had thousands of victims, well, probably hundreds. Who were the clients or perpetrators? Well, he was. That's the point. He was the perpetrator. They don't have to be rich or powerful people. They just need to be held accountable. But what if there are no people? What if there is no trafficking? And I think the government admitted that there was no trafficking. What they basically charged him with was transporting young women, some above age, some underage, basically the same thing that Sean Combs was accused of, across state lines, for purposes of sex or prostitution. And I don't believe there were any allegations in the indictments, certainly not in the first indictment, that he trafficked these women to other people, certainly not for pay or anything like that. So, maybe their answer why there hasn't been convictions of other people is because there's no evidence that any other people committed any crimes. Okay. I am disappointed that so many in journalism and the general public get fixated on this Epstein case. There's always such a tendency to look for the lewd and the salacious. President Trump said it well last week. Why are we bothering to talk about this when there are so many real issues that we need to deal with right now? I could not agree. I could not agree more. The story you relate about Mandy Patinkin, remember the story? He was sitting next to a guy and had a terrible vibe. The guy was, ooh, and he made his baby move away. And it turns out the guy was Bibi Netanyahu, although he didn't know who he was. The story you related about Mandy Patinkin was vile and heartbreaking. I always loved his singing and acting, but no more enough. What is wrong with these people? I pray for Bibi every night. He is our generation's Winston Churchill. Well, you can agree or disagree with that assessment, but you cannot say that back in 1984, Mandy Patinkin smelled a vibe and moved his baby. He's either lying through his teeth, which is probably what he's doing, or he's a real bigot to make his baby move because he had a vibe that was negative. And even though Bibi was working for the Labor government at the time, for the most liberal prime minister in Israel's history, Shimon Peres, it's just total nonsense. This is a nice one. What a life you have lived, Professor. You came into this life with many gifts and have used them well. Thank you for your most respected opinion as always. Mandy Patinkin is on such a wrong track about Netanyahu, who is a much greater man than Patinkin will ever be. He has accused Israel of doing to Palestinian people what was done to them in World War II. What an imbecile. I agree with that. You can't make analogies like that. And that's exactly what I wrote about in today's New York Post. So you might find it interesting. It's online. So we live in a weird time. We're seeing this tremendous increase in anti-Semitism. It's not so much an increase. It's going back to what it was prior to the Second World War. Anti-Semitism has been a constant in world history from the earliest recorded times. In the Bible, in Egypt, in the book of Esther, there are certain people, all that kind of thing. And it continued all through the period of time up until the Second World War. And then after the genocide of the Jews, and that's the origin of the term genocide, the murder of 6 million Jews in gas chambers and killing squads, there was a moratorium. And I grew up in a golden age. There was some anti-Semitism. I couldn't get a job in a Wall Street firm. It was kind of polite anti-Semitism. Every so often, I get called by a dirty name, a dirty word for Jew. But it was pretty good. When I went to Harvard, I have the distinction of, people told me this, of being the first Jewish Jew ever to teach at Harvard. I'm talking about Harvard has been there since 16, well, I don't know why. And there have been, a few handfuls of Jews on the faculty before I got there. But I was the first Jewish Jew. All the other Jews who were on the faculty were kind of waspy Jews who wore crimson underwear and regarded themselves as more Harvard than Jewish. So there was some of that, but it was still a golden age. But now, since the beginning of the century, we've seen a return to the dark ages when it comes to Jews and Israel and a Jewish state. And so it really portends some dangerous times for Jews, not only in Israel and in the United States, but around the world. And we're seeing a resurgence of the oldest prejudice and the ugliest prejudice. And it's much worse than racism. Why? It's much worse than sexism. It's much worse than anti-gay attitudes. All of those are bad. But anti-Semitism is worse. Why? Because all those other bigotries, the trajectory is against them. Nobody would dream of saying anything negative today on a college campus about gay people, Black people, and other people. No. But when it comes to Jews, the trajectory is in the wrong direction. It's increasing. All the other bigotries are decreasing. Anti-Semitism is increasing. That's why it's worse and more dangerous, and why I'm devoting so much of my time to defending the underdog. I always defended the underdog. All through my life, I marched in the civil rights movement. I defended gay and lesbian Americans. They were the underdogs. They're no longer the underdogs. On college campuses, they're the privileged. The most privileged group on college campuses are Muslims. And the more radical the Muslims are, and the more anti-Israel, the more privileged they are. And so all this stuff you read about, oh, Harvard is on a balanced way looking at anti-Islamic attitudes and anti-Semitism. That's nonsense. There's no anti-Islamic attitudes on campus. They're the most privileged group on campus, and it's only anti-Semitism. So you can't create a false equivalence when there is no false equivalence. That too is a double standard and a form of bigotry. Write to me if you disagree. Tell me what you think, and we'll get back and discuss more of this tomorrow on the Durst Show.